Okay, well, welcome everybody to this webinar on preprints and open peer review. I'm glad you could all join us. So first up, Prachi Havasi is going to be...
Hi.
Prachi is going to be telling us about the rise of preprints in biology and their role in speeding up communication. Thanks, Prachi.
Sure. Okay, so I'd like to just, so can you see this now? So I'd like to just motivate this discussion of preprints and sort of the necessity for them. So, I think we all don't necessarily need to see this level of detail on the data to know that it's actually been getting more and more difficult to publish in the life sciences. So if you look at this graph here comparing several different journals from 1984 to 2014, this is taken from Ron Vale's PNAS paper and preprint. And you can see that, many years ago, the number of panels and figures in these publications were much lower than they are today. So there are many more panels, but really more importantly, there's an explosion of supplemental information. So those of us that have been publishing, recently, we know that the bar for publication is so much greater than it used to be. And so this is also data that's been taken from Ron Vale's paper, in which he describes the amount of time that it takes for graduate students. So these are graduate students at UCSF over these two different time periods. And you can see that it's actually taken almost more than a year longer for students to get their first author publication out. So,
Prachi.
Yes.
For some reason, your slides are not coming through on the YouTube site. Sorry,
really?
Because I've not set this up properly.
Okay, well, so I'll describe the data. How's that?
Yes, okay. I'm not sure if anyone has any tips. We've got it showing on the Google Hangouts.
It is showing in the Google Hangouts?
Not coming through on the, oh, now it's coming through
on
the YouTube page as well. Okay.
Okay.
Great. So, sorry, it's a short delay, but carry on.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so just for those who weren't able to see it before, on the left side of your screen, you should be able to see that there's actually this increased amount of data that's actually required for publication now in 2000, from the 2014 data compared to 1984 in these different journals. So not only an increase in the panels that appear in print, but also this huge amount of increase in supplemental information. And so because of this large increase in the amount of data required for publication, it naturally is going to take a lot more time in order to collect all this data and get it out for publication. So the data on the right is actually showing you that it takes, almost a year longer, and actually greater than a year longer, for students, so graduate students at UCSF, to get their first author paper out. And so we know that obviously in the sciences and in all fields, really, publications are critical for getting evaluated. So, obviously students need these papers for graduation, they need them for fellowships, for obtaining jobs, for laboratories to get funding, and even for promotion and tenure decisions. So, really slowing down this entire publication process is really making it so much more difficult, to meet all of these criteria that we need to advance in our careers. And so that's sort of where preprints come in, which are just, as you may know, are manuscripts shared online before the completion of journal organized peer review. So you would essentially just post your manuscript online in a variety of different venues. So you can do a comparison of sort of this method where we go through journal submission, where initially you have your manuscript and then you submit to your first journal. Maybe the first journal rejects it, maybe it's a desk reject, maybe it actually goes out for review and takes even longer to come back, and then you're going to journal number 2. And then you get those reviews back, and perhaps you don't make it all the way through, you may even do a round of revision and ultimately get rejected, obviously we know all of the examples where you're sending it to multiple journals. And so, obviously every single step of this and revision cycles and waiting for reviewers to get back, and even just securing reviewers takes an enormous amount of time.
So if I could Stepping in again, sorry about this. It's technical problems. If you would mind just stopping the screen share and starting again.
Sure.
Hopefully
No
get it back.
Okay, let's try that.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, hi.
Try it one more time.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you see it?
It's like a perfect metaphor of submitting a paper in your grad experience.
That's right.
Start over and over.
Start over, exactly. It's the perfect. That's perfect metaphor, right? So, you know, it really, as you know, through all of these different rounds of revision and resubmission and submission to other journals, and then of course there's sort of reformatting for all of the different criteria for each individual journal, and this is a huge amount of time that goes into this, right? So this is not necessarily, you know, this is not avoidable loss of time. So it can take many, many months to years. So now if you contrast that to this new method of submitting your manuscript to a preprint server, it takes less than, you know, 48 hours in many cases to go through some, you know, basic screening processes so that it can be posted publicly. And now, you know, compared to waiting for all of this time to get your paper published in order to get community feedback, you are able to instantly get feedback from the community. You can send your preprint out to colleagues. You can, you know, preprint prior to a conference and make sure that, you know, people actually have something to read in addition to just what you say in your talk or at your poster. So you can really much more rapidly get some feedback and you know, spur discussion and on your work compared to the sort of traditional process. So just a few points to make, which is that the preprints are actually, they're permanent, so they, you know, they aren't taken down. So that sort of is one of the critical things that you know, maybe can help understand why, you know, you don't end up having a lot of, you know, people are concerned that they're maybe just too low of a bar to post something online, that you may have sort of more garbage work and things like that. But by virtue of it being permanent and versioned and citable, you know, really your reputation is tied to this document. And, you know, you as a researcher are putting something out, you know, publicly available. And so those of us that have submitted preprints know sort of how nerve-wracking it can be to really put your work out there before peer review, you know, where you really want to put your best foot forward and you're tying your reputation to this work, and it's becoming very, very widely available very quickly. And so, you know, because of all of the benefits of getting this sort of more rapid sort of process to getting your work more widely available, there's been a, you know, very recent explosion in the number of preprints in the life sciences. So you can see this graph that was collected by Jordan and I of prepubmed.org, and you can see that, you know, sort of in the more recent years, excuse me, yeah. So you can see 2017, 16, 15, sort of on the last couple of years, there's been a huge increase in the number of postings to the various preprint servers. And so, you know, this is fantastic. So it really seems like there's been this sort of increase in buy-in from the community, and there's a lot, you know, I'm having increased discussions about this with my colleagues and my students, and you know, one of the things that I did mention is that, you know, a large benefit is that you have this amount of community feedback, and a lot of discussion can happen at a much earlier stage than what normally happens in the publication process. But one problem that comes up is that, you know, while this is a main advantage of preprints, in practice, the amount of feedback that's sort of coming back to preprint authors is still quite minimal. So you get a lot of downloads of these preprints, so we can look at all the metrics and see that there's a huge amount of, the work is read much earlier and much more widely when you take a look at preprints compared to the journal submissions that take much longer to see the light of day. But in reality, are we really getting as much public feedback or private feedback? And part of the problem here is, you know, kind of lack of data on this. So a lot of the feedback does come in sort of point-to-point, you know, emails back and forth with the authors, which is not really visible to anybody else. But as far as, you know, public comments on preprint servers and things like that, not all preprint servers allow comments, but the ones that do, the feedback publicly is still a little bit minimal. So, you know, I'd like to pose that there are still some sort of some problems with the current system in that we do have this sort of low level of feedback for preprints. But there are also sort of other issues in the sense that, you know, peer reviewers, you know, when you want to get increased feedback, you know, you think about all your other colleagues that would act as peer reviewers, and they're often already overextended. Everybody is busy. You know, there's hardly any time to participate in peer review as it is. If you talk to editors of journals, they will tell you how difficult it has become to secure reviewers for the journal articles themselves. You know, that they have to go through many different requests just to get those 2 or 3 reviewers to agree. And then simultaneously, we have this other problem where we have this sort of enormous pool of early career researchers who, you know, have, you know, obviously the ability and the interest in participating in peer review, but they don't have many opportunities to participate. And so the solution that, you know, that I would propose is to do a preprint journal club. So, you know, we are all familiar with journal clubs. They're ubiquitous. Almost, you know, every institution across the, you know, world has a journal club where they have students or postdocs or you know, everybody in the institution is sort of involved at some level in sort of reading the newest literature and commenting on it and sort of dissecting it and learning how to you know, take apart the paper and decide whether it's sound science. And so, you know, if we were to sort of harness that energy of those journal clubs and review preprints, we could really have the opportunity, for example, you know, if you sort of co-opted a journal club to do preprint peer review, you know, you would really have the opportunity from a training perspective, for example, you know, rather than doing a journal club on a published paper that has been through some level of peer review, you know, so you're sort of looking at the director's cut, you know, something that hasn't had a large amount of material shunted to the supplemental data. And you also have, you know, sort of the author's original intended work that you're able to evaluate. And so it also gives you the ability to perhaps catch even more mistakes that haven't been through sort of any round of peer review. So from a training perspective, it's really great. And then, of course, you know, the results of this review, rather than, you know, a discussion just among the group, can actually be sent back to preprint authors, and it can help them improve the quality of their work, so they could put up a new version of the preprint or submit a revised version to a journal. So, you know, that feedback can be directly sent back to the authors, or it can be posted publicly. So as you can imagine, this solves kind of multiple problems. So you can, for one, harness the vast amount of energy and talent of early career researchers to increase the amount of feedback on preprints, which is, as I mentioned, you know, still a little bit lower than we would like. And then we can also, you know, if we were to do this, you know, within these institutions, we could give the ECRs some formal training on peer review, which is sorely lacking. So I think most of us can say that none of us were actually formally trained on peer review. You kind of learn it by doing it, and you know, as you go, and you know, you sort of have to have experiences in order to get better at it, to get more experiences, in sort of this vicious cycle in which you never really receive formal training. So that seems like another benefit of doing this in sort of a journal club setting. And then, of course, you know, if you give feedback back to the authors, these early career reviewers can increase their interaction with other scientists, which is great. So you can sort of start this dialogue between people who are doing these journal clubs and the authors of the work. So this is really the thing that I wanted to propose, and to think about how this would work in practice. Let's see if I can end the screen share here. Those are all the slides I have, but to think about how this sort of preprint journal club could work in practice. So I really had the opportunity in my department. So our department has a course that it runs every semester for graduate students, and it's called the Analysis of Scientific Papers. And so every single semester, a different departmental faculty member is sort of in charge of this class. And each person can make their own theme. So we've had themes ranging from departmental faculty. Sorry, I'm getting some feedback here from somebody else. And so, you know, each person can select a theme, and we've had themes ranging from, you know, popular science articles, you know, sort of science that's made it into the popular media. We've had other themes, which is sort of like looking at papers that are controversial. And so it became my turn to teach this course, and I decided, you know, in this context, why don't we do a preprint journal club? So have the students only select preprints and review those in our course. And so we did that last fall. And it was a really great success. So I started the course by doing a little bit of instruction on, sort of what how to lay out a formal review, as you would if you were reviewing for a journal, and sort of gave the students a little bit of some guidance on that, and then had them throughout the semester each select a preprint, and then they would present just like it would be for a normal journal club. They would sort of go through, they would spend some amount of time going through the paper and then dissecting the work and giving their feedback. And then, based on the discussion from the group, we would sort of decide together on, how to structure the review. And the student who presented, along with another student in the class, would write up a formal review, and then they would send it to the author by email and also post it online. And we posted it to the winnower at that time. And so this was really great experience all around. So it was really great for the students because they actually, for one, had some sort of consequence of this. So a lot of times we are all familiar with having journal clubs where there's no, where there's a great discussion and there's a great amount of dissection for individual, pieces of the work, but then it doesn't really go anywhere and no one ever hears any of that criticism. And so it's great to actually use that and give it to the authors so they can actually improve their work. And then in every case, or almost every case that I can recall, the authors responded to our reviews with a point-by-point response. So just as they would in a response to reviewers at a journal, the authors would send back their responses and tell us, exactly, how they had addressed or why they thought that comment was, not applicable in this specific case, or, they would give us their point-by-point responses, which I think was a, great training opportunity for the students to sort of see, how that process happens, and also to get a little bit of feedback on their reviews. And so it was a really, really a great opportunity. So after doing this course, it was which was a very big success. I took all of my course materials and I posted it online at asapbio.org. So, along with my course materials, I think I put my introductory slide deck on there. And so we sort of got the word out a little bit that this is something that we had done very successfully. And I had pretty quickly started to get a ton of feedback from colleagues that were saying that they either were doing this or now were excited about trying this at their own institutions. And a great benefit was that a colleague of mine had decided to start a preprint journal club at his school, and their graduate students, actually, one of them had selected my own preprint and given me feedback, which was, great full circle thing to happen. So I personally got some feedback from this in sort of an indirect way. So that had a lot of great benefits. So I think now this has sort of evolved, and we're hoping to get, a lot more expansion of this, because as I mentioned, these preprints are these journal clubs are happening everywhere. So we can really use all of that energy and the talent of all of these students who are learning how to do this, and allow that to increase the amount of feedback on preprints. And so there are a lot more platforms and ways to do this now. So for example, there have been some great work. So Daniela Saderi at OHSU, a PhD student there, and Sam Hindle, who's at UCSF, they are about to launch a platform called Pre-Review, in which they will provide resources and community for reviewers and a platform to post reviews with a DOI. And so that should be launching in late September. And I think we're going to talk a little bit later about different platforms here. But so I would say one final statement I would leave you with is that I think through this experience and doing this preprint journal club course at my institution, I think one thing that became very obvious to me is that one step that was sort of missing is this formal training on peer review. And so I think, I was able to give a little bit of that instruction, but it was really an ongoing process in which we discussed the feedback, the reviews from the students on a week-by-week basis. And so I think that may be a barrier for, people to include more early career researchers in review. And so, there are many different efforts that I know that are ongoing, and we're working on that too, to sort of harness the peer review best practices that the journals are sort of cultivating, and trying to get that out on the educational platforms. But hopefully we can sort of all work together to try and move towards this goal of trying to use things that are already happening at every institution and increase the feedback on preprints, which really are advancing, both the science and also, how quickly our careers can move. So I think that's all I have for my comments.
Thank you very much, Prachi. It's thanks for sharing that excitement around preprint journal clubs as me for giving feedback to authors on their preprints. That's really great and good to see it's getting so much momentum. Is there anyone in the Hangout who had a quick question for Prachi before we move on to the next presenter? We can also ask questions at the end. Okay, great. So Scott Edmonds from GigaScience, executive editor of GigaScience, is now going to share his perspective on open peer review.
Fingers crossed the slides and the slide share work. If it I posted my slides here if people need them, and let me, if it's not working, let me know. I don't know if I have to like keep moving things so it doesn't shut down, or, but anyway, I will attempt to do a share now and see if this works. So let's see, share. Okay. Is this working? Is this working, Lachlan?
If that's good.
Okay, is this working?
Yes.
Can you see my slide?
We can see the first slide.
Okay, so yeah, thanks for attending. I am going to give a publisher's perspective and also a self-confessed sort of fanboy. I've drank the Kool-Aid on preprints and open peer review, so it's also my perspective as somebody who uses them for, you know, publishing my own work as well, and, you know, my own peer reviews. So open peer review, it's not a new thing. Nice examples going back to the early 80s of journals attempting things like discussion with the reviewers sections. But a lot happened in open peer review, late 90s, specifically the BMJ really led the way, opening up open peer review on that medical journal. The BMC series launched about the same time, and interesting factoid, Fiona Goodley was the person behind both of these efforts. She was at the BMJ, then at BMC, back at BMJ. Open peer review, it kind of became a thing. There's a cockroach here. It kind of became a thing in medical circles because medics have big conflicts of interest, you know, with you know, pharma funding, clinical trials and the like. So it made a lot of sense there. BMC did great things setting up pre-publication histories for all of their medical articles. So in nearly 20 years, there were tens of thousands of papers like this. Why can't biologists do this if the, you know, the medics can? So GigaScience launched about 5 years ago, doing very similar things with open peer review, 100% mandated, opened and signed. We give DataCite DOIs to our reviews to give people credit. We're like probably third journal to integrate with Publons, and we originally had an opt-out option if people had issues. Only one person ever used it, so after a year we got rid of this. So we're 100% open. Since then, a lot has happened. There's this great multidisciplinary overview that John Tennant published, and many other people discussing all of the new platforms and schemes. Things like decoupled, you know, peer review, things like Publons, and many more open peer review journals. think a big game changer and relevant for this topic has been preprints. Prachi gave some good background on this, and from a peer review perspective, this has been really kind of groundbreaking, getting the discussion getting the discussion started before, much earlier, before the paper is formally published. Huge rise in this means, these are people who are consenting to have these discussions before, openly. Big kind of game changer for us was in 2013. We were publishing, we were peer reviewing a big kind of community competition paper, the Assemblathon 2. The reviewers of this were quite kind of open science advocates. The competition themselves, they were very, big bloggers doing everything openly and transparently as well. While this was being reviewed, one of the reviewers, because everything was in archive, archive already, he posted his peer review immediately after doing this on his blog. It was, the authors commented, tweeted. The other peer reviewer basically outed himself. The peer reviewer, Titus Brand, doing this, basically started an internet meme, Titus is Chuck Norris. Waking up the next day to see all of this happen, as editors, you're traditionally taught that this whole process has to be kind of, behind closed doors, in a kind of controlled environment. But all of this discussion had happened kind of independently of me. And I thought it was fantastic. My immediate thought was like, this is great. So many eyes have seen this. Everybody's consented to this. It made it a much better paper. It made people have, brought a lot more attention to it. Eventually it passed peer review based on, a lot of these community comments. Huge amounts of coverage. There's been at least 20 blogs and, articles written about this, a lot of it because of the peer review. It worked all around. And since then I've been like I've really been a big fan of this and can see how preprints and open review works together really, really well. So this helps with some of the questions that we've been asked, told to ask, but a few questions that and fears that people who are not used to open peer review often raise to us are, are reviews poor quality? Are reviewers, more likely or less likely to reject things? Is it more difficult? Do reviews take longer? And the kind of tough one is, the whole process of kind of blinding and stuff is to protect people. If we remove this, are people going to be vengeful? Are there going to be consequences? So as the medics started, kind of kicked this whole process off, we can use evidence-based medicine kind of techniques to do this. The medics have done RCTs on the, there are hundreds of thousands of open peer reviews, articles just doing this. They set up RCTs and they kind of studied these variables to see, we can see what the consequences of open peer review are. So coming back to these myths, or coming back to these fears, you can see from the RCTs, fears about reviews being poor quality are not the case. There's been quite cool quantitative tests that people can try to assess quality of reviews, and they've seen that reviews are generally better quality. They are more constructive, but that doesn't change the end result. There aren't differences in the acceptance rejection rate. Reviewers are just as stringent, possibly even more so. They're more constructive, but if they were going to reject a paper, the paper will get rejected. The fears about the difficulties in this, these are actually founded. the RCTs see that it does take marginally longer to do open peer reviews, a few hours longer on average to write them, and it is harder to find reviewers. So this is a cost, really. You have to take, it's a cost-benefit analysis, and we see the quality is better, but is it worth it? And this is a thing that has put off other journals from adopting it. But we've got, again, good data on this. BMC series are great, have fantastic data on this because, you know, they've got 50,000, 100,000 reviews. They have a lot of open and closed journals that have got very similar scope. So you can basically, you know, compare them against each other, comparing medical genomics and genomics, comparing medical genetics and genetics. Data that colleagues there have shown me show that it's about 5–10% harder to find peer reviewers. So that is the cost. That is what we have to take into account. The tough one is you know, our open. Is open peer review going to lead to vengeful referees? And that's the tough one. You know, people have framed this in other ways as well. You know, protecting junior researchers, protecting women, ethnic minorities, and the like. You know, Nature Neuroscience put this in an editorial that, you know, younger, less established scientists would be reluctant to reveal themselves for fear of retaliation from more powerful colleagues. I think this particular argument, it's a tough one, but I think it's been very well rebutted in this blog by Mick Watson, where he says, you know, are we happy with this situation that powerful and vindictive scientists can basically destroy people's careers? You know, retaliatory revenge attacks should be considered serious scientific misconduct, and perpetrators should be identified and sacked. You know, this is worse than plagiarism. This is worse than making up data. It should spell the end career. You know, are we going to sit back and accept this? And the arguments in support of anonymous peer review are actually powerful arguments against it. These powerful and vindictive scientists are only able to make attacks because they're behind the cloak of anonymity. If the reviews were published alongside their names, then the community could soon recognize if they were behaving badly, and action would follow. You know, the issue is completely blinded or completely open. It's when one side has power over the other that it becomes a problem. And the problem with complete blinding is it never works. You can always guess to some extent who are the authors, who are the reviewers. So from my own kind of fanboy perspective, I think that the only drawback that I've seen with open peer review is it will end amusing parody videos about Reviewer 3 and internet memes. Like 10 years, I've used this and have found not seen any other problems all around. So yeah, thank you for your time. My slides have got some of these links and references in, and I am ready to answer questions. Hello?
So I have a question.
Okay.
So you mentioned that the quality from that BMC study, the quality was better of open peer reviews.
Yes.
Was it really better, or was it just comparable to closed reviews?
So that there's a link to that study. It was comparing a few groups of BMC journals. In one of the comparisons, this index that they used was slightly better. Not a huge amount, but you know, a lot of the RCTs have seen comparable quality, not really higher or lower. This BMC study that I quote, and I can send you the link. The link should be embedded in there. Show on the index that they used for, I think it was immunology, the Immunology Journal and Microbiology Journal comparison. To see.
All right, thanks.
Any other questions? Or do we want to come back and discuss some of this from the panel questions later.
We can discuss some of those points, but thanks very much, Scott, for covering up on some of the reasons people might be worried about the peer review and debunking many of them. That was great. So I might pass over to Chris now, who is he's open peer reviewed a lot himself, and also been open peer reviewed so he's been an author and a reviewer, and can share with us his experience of the process and whether he's experienced any of these vindictive reviewers himself. Thanks, Chris.
So as you can see, I am hiding in a basement, an undisclosed location, because of all the hate I've been receiving, which is a joke, just to clarify. I have not received any negative feedback based on my reviews, but let me sort of give you a little bit of a background. When talking with my fellow colleagues about peer review and journals, you always hear the same complaints, and it's always the same broken system and the problem of submitting papers over and over, not knowing who reviews everything, and having this absolutely horrible business model where we are often paying journals to take our work and sell it to our colleagues, which, when you start thinking about this as any business model, you basically lose your marbles. And there are all these problems, and whenever someone tries to do something, they hit the wall, and the system is too big, like it has been entrenched, and I have to publish in Nature. If I'm not published in Nature, I'm not going to get the job, yada, yada. Basically, nothing changes. But recently, there have been a few initiatives that allow us researchers to sort of play the game and try to change the system at the same time. And I think the initial, at least what I've heard, the initial such movement came from the Peer Reviewers Openness Initiative. And I'm going to post a link to this. And this is basically a set of guidelines of, like, if I review things, I want the authors to follow certain guidelines about openness and transparency. So we're talking about open code and open data, which everyone should agree on, but journals have little to no incentive to actually enforce, because if they enforce such policies, then they decrease the number of submissions, and people will go to different journals. So only a few journals, such as GigaScience and PLOS, actually had the courage to not only have this policy, but also to enforce it. But as a reviewer, you might not be happy to review for journals that don't do it. At the same time, you want to be part of the community. You want to have influence on the quality of the paper. So what do? So you can sign for this Peer Reviewers Openness Initiative, and they recommend to basically contact the editor and ask the editor to ask the authors to provide a note saying that they subscribe to all these values and they follow all these things in their manuscript. So I've tried that on a few occasions, and usually the editors don't even reply. Sometimes they would reply, and they would say, like, this is not our journal policy, and the paper gets sent to someone else because people are busy and whatnot. And editors are confused, like, what is this thing? You should just tell me what you think about this paper so I could reject it or not. So that didn't quite work for me. So then I'm going to hear about this a bit more. Another initiative came around. It's called Academic Karma. And this platform, which I wholeheartedly recommend using, allows you as a reviewer, when you get this credit email saying, oh, we would like to have your opinion because you're such an expert about the paper, you can go to this website and basically punch in details of this paper, including the email of the corresponding authors, and in an anonymous fashion make an agreement with the author, completely bypassing the editor, saying, well, I, the reviewer, promise to get back to you my review in 2 weeks, and I'm going to sign it, and it's going to be public, and I promise to review the revision of your paper. And you can change any of these things. So it's all a negotiation. And you can require or request from the author to basically follow certain standards of doing science, such as sharing code, sharing data, and publishing a preprint of that paper. So I started doing that, and I'm just looking through my list, and I think I have something like 15 or 16 different requests. And it's a great way because I can get a review request from a journal whose policies and different lobbying initiative in the U.S. Congress I do not agree with, but I can still review for them with clear conscience if the authors of the publication put their paper on a preprint server and publish their data. So this allows me to do that, and I have I think it's around 50% success rate with these requests. Usually authors are aware how hard it is to get a reviewer, and they also are aware that public peer reviews tend to be a bit more thought through in terms of language. It's much harder to reject the paper saying, "Oh, I didn't like it," in a couple of lines when you have to sign it. So this has been working very well, and I recommend everyone doing this. And it's a way basically to change the system by little step, by basically bypassing the current structure. And maybe one day we're going to end up in a reality where everything is a preprint, and all preprints get some degree of peer review or basically commenting and evaluation. And we have just a ranked system, the same way as when I'm looking for a new book on Amazon. It's not that Amazon is only selling the books that have been reviewed by 2 anonymous random people and is not selling any other books. No, you can self-publish on Amazon almost everything, and then those books get reviewed when people read them, and those reviews accrued certain valuation, and you can pick which books are good based on many reviews from many people. And hopefully we're going to have something like that for science as well. And there will be place for those elite sort of venues, such Nature and Science, but those will happen afterwards. They will not block a publication from being published. They will pick the most influential papers that stood the test of time and the validation by the community in a fashion a bit more like F1 Tizen Prime. So I totally see that happening. There's also another side of this whole story as a author. I post my preprints, and not only I post my preprints, but I also advertise and ask for feedback. I basically tell people, "Hey, we're publishing this, and could you tell us what you think?" And often it's what I tell my colleagues is like the biggest gripe usually is like, "Oh, someone published something in my field and they forgot to cite me," and they're like, "Oh, this is terrible. How could they not know the literature?" And now, if there's a preprint, and there should be a citation to your work in that preprint, you should just go and ask about it. And if you don't do that, and then the paper gets published, it's just on you. So I definitely see there are different ways how people can comment and contribute to pre-publication peer review. And that happens to us as well. Gathering this feedback have led to getting comments. And then when we get back the reviews that were solicited by the publisher, we actually put everything together. So our reply to reviews is not just reply to reviews from the publisher. It's reply to all feedback we got from various different channels, including comments on bioRxiv and whatnot. And that allows us, I mean, that's, it's not a random trial, but I feel that by showing that we get opinions on this paper from more sources and we address those issues, I believe that this shows the editor that this is more solid work because there were more eyes on it. So I think that also helps, and potentially it can be also used for pre-submission inquiries and things like that. But basically, you had the preprint online for a while, and you got some feedback from people, and you incorporated that feedback. And when you submit the paper, you basically say, hey, those are the reviews I got from the community already, and they're positive, and would you like to propel my career by kindly publishing my paper and selling it to my colleagues and all that? So I really believe that, to kind of sum up, I really believe that we can influence the system in this grassroots manner by publishing preprints and reviewing each other's preprints, and also pushing people towards preprints and doing our reviews in an open fashion, even if those reviews are solicited via normal manners through closed channels. This can be done with Academic Karma, and I think it's a great proof of concept platform to do such things. And that's all from me. I apologize for not having any slides, but I hope this verbal narrative was good enough. Happy to take questions.
Great, thank you very much, Chris, for being a power user of preprints and peer review of preprints. Does anyone have any questions for Chris? So I might move on to my presentation then. So I'm going to try screen share as well. Okay, Scott, can you see that?
I can see it.
Okay, great.
Hopefully everybody else can. If anyone has problems, I'll interrupt you.
Thanks. Okay, so I'm going to try to answer the question, well, ask the question at least. Can preprints help make peer review more transparent and also possibly more efficient? So just to quickly touch on peer review, as we all know, it's kind of an amazing human endeavor when you think about it, in the sense that there's more than 1.5 million articles peer reviewed every year. It's probably close to 2 million. That's from more than 25,000 active peer reviewed journals, between 1 and maybe up to 5 reviewers per article. Reviewers do this for free. And it's commonly held belief that, though probably not really something that's scientifically proven in itself, that it improves the quality and reliability of the scientific literature. On the other side of the coin, this is an extremely expensive thing. Even though reviewers aren't paid, it costs more than $10 billion per annum, mostly going to publishers to coordinate the entire process. It's difficult to access peer review outside of the journal system. And in a sense, authors pay for this either by relinquishing their copyright or by paying open access fees. It also takes many months to receive feedback. There's huge variability in the process, and a big inefficiency in the process by everything having to be reviewed after rejection of different journals. So there are obviously different types of open peer review. I'm going to focus mostly on open content review, but also, as well as the content, the identity of the reviewer can be revealed as well. And it's worth noting that most current open content peer review through journals is only open once accepted. And so, of course, there's a lot of rejected papers that you never get to see the reviews on those, even, I guess, if they're accepted in another journal. And I think this limits some of the potential benefits of open peer review. So one question is whether peer review is gradually becoming more open. GigaScience is obviously at the forefront of this, and there are other journals, as Scott indicated, the medical journals, particularly BMJ was one of the leaders in this as well. Publons has been a big player in this, and it allows for publications of review, but it does require that all three parties kind of consent to it. PubPeer also lets academics publish their post-publication peer reviews, or indeed preprint peer reviews anonymously. And you might ask, what are the benefits from open peer review? I think the major benefit is for the readers to assess how rigorously the study's been evaluated, and I think to a certain degree it encourages reviewer objectivity. Scott has gone through some of the criticisms and debunked some of those. I guess one of the ones that still stands is that it is a bit hard to find willing peer reviews, and that's just kind of a cost, I guess, that we have to pay, that 5% extra time taken to find people who are willing to do open identity peer review. So I want to make the point that preprints make it possible now to do, rather than this kind of conditional on acceptance open peer review, an end-to-end open peer review process, something like what Chris has just described, in which the reviews are publicly posted next to the preprint as soon as they're completed, or potentially with a time lag to allow some sort of author response. Authors upload their revisions and post their response publicly, and it's not conditional on acceptance. And I think there are substantial benefits from this kind of end-to-end peer review, open peer review process, alongside the benefits I've talked about just of having open peer review, of being able to assess how well a paper was examined by the reviewers. But it also allows for full portability of reviews between journals, minimizing inefficiencies. It makes it more likely that authors will actually have to address serious issues in their manuscript rather than just resubmitting to another journal without addressing them. And it does allow for full transparency of the review process for readers. Of course, there's a potential risk that authors may be stuck, I guess, and never be able to publish their paper if they come across an unreasonably combative reviewer. But I think this can be mitigated by making the reviewer's identity open with the review. And so just to finish, I'd like to ask the kind of feasibility question. This all sounds great, but is it possible to actually open review more than 1.5 million preprints a year? There's obviously a fair amount of technology that would be required for that, and there's also community buy-in. So preprint servers are pretty much there, of course. I would argue there needs to be a good incentive structure for reviewing as well. Good methods for allocating reviewers to manuscripts, and also platforms for sharing preprint reviews. And on the community side, there needs to be buy-in from the publishers, and that's probably the biggest sticking point, I would argue. There needs to be a willingness to consider using reviewers chosen by a different journal, and just using open preprint peer reviews in general, and encouragement to the reviewers they solicit to post their reviews of preprints as well. And so I'm one of the co-founders of Academic Carbon, and we've been working towards building some of this infrastructure, or at least proof of principle, both on the technology side and also on the community side. So on the technology side, so we've got a platform for sharing open reviews of preprints. Part of it, our platform is for promoting and reviewing preprints at conferences. We also have a platform specifically targeted to Journal Club preprint peer review. We have tools for building theme pages, so people can create theme pages around of preprints around areas they're interested in. And we've also introduced, although it hasn't been terribly successful, this idea of a currency, and that you kind of pay for reviews by doing reviews for others. And on the community side, we're indexing preprints from more than 80 different servers. We're trying to promote open peer review and also open peer reviewers by indexing as much open peer reviewers of preprints that we can find, as well as the ones generated through our own site. We've created a bit of what we're calling kind of a marketplace, in inverted commas, for authors to indicate if their paper submitted to a preprint journal, uploaded to a preprint server is not yet been submitted to a journal, and therefore they're looking for a suitable journal to submit to. And we tweet about this on our New Preprints channels, and also tools for supporting the Peer Reviews Openness initiative that Chris talked about as well before. So that's all the slides I have, and I'd just like to open up to questions in general, and just about my presentation, but also about the state of preprint peer review. Thank you. So it's open for discussion. Now, does anyone want to jump in, or we've got some questions from the YouTube channel as well?
We have questions on the YouTube channel, and we've received about 10, 12 questions online as well. So
one of the major questions that keeps coming up is, how do we get senior people, PI, more interested in, or to buy into this whole preprints thing? So to my mind, the biggest question is this question of buy-in. How do we get people to buy into preprints, and also to buy into commenting and reviewing and soliciting comments, the sort of things that we've heard the speakers talk about? So I don't have actually the answers to that at all. I'm really interested in some of the views of the people on this Hangouts, the speakers and others as well.
I could comment on that briefly. You guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I've been doing several presentations, sort of our local communities and just the faculty in my department and my institution, and also at some national meetings. And I always thought one thing that would go a long way in sort of getting people to sort of jump on board was getting the funders involved. And so since the NIH in the US, the National Institutes of Health, has sort of come out and said that they are allowing people to, put their preprints into their biosketches and things like that so that they can get credit for their work, even if it's not yet published. I always thought that, if you sort of dangle that in front of them with the money, that the adoption would follow. And I think that's definitely been happening. So I don't know a single researcher that would say, oh no, when I submit my grant application, I would like to wait until it's published before I get credit for this, for having completed this work. So I think generally as that has happened, I'm getting a lot more feedback from colleagues that were previously reluctant, that they really would like to get more involved and get those manuscripts out so that they can demonstrate either feasibility or productivity for grant applications. So I think that in general, and if that were to sort of expand across different funders and in different countries, whatever the different mechanisms are, I think that goes a long way towards just people doing it for practical reasons.
If I could just add to that, one of the most exciting announcements from my point of view last year was that the Chan Zuckerberg Foundation was mandating that all the papers had to go on preprint servers first. And I think Gates Foundation might be following or has followed. So those kinds of, rather than, I guess, mandating that people pay for open access charges, at least putting the initial preprint up is a really good step forward.
I agree. The as with all these things, it's the people with teeth are usually it's the funders and also it's the journals, and some of the until now some publishers have been a bit skeptical, but then we and PLOS have been quite proactive in contacting people whose work are in preprint servers. That's got to be an incentive that it's flattering if editors proactively contact you and say your work is great, really be interested in having this in the journal. That's one, as if more journals proactively get involved with it and push it, that has to help. There's the speed in terms of grants, getting work out. It affects fields, really rapidly progressing fields. Things are changing a lot. That has to be a benefit for researchers, claiming priority. I see it a lot in the people using Oxford Nanopore sequencers, the Nanopore community. That's one field where month to month things have been running so rapidly. That entire community has just got used to posting all of their work in preprint servers. I'm sure there's lots of other similar, very rapidly progressing fields as well. So you can definitely see it in kind of areas like that. It's not fully joined up over all of science, and we need buy-in from, rather than skepticism, from the bigger journals. But I think we've come a long way, just in the 5 years since GigaScience has launched. We've seen a lot happen. So
I wonder if there's any people from publishers on the Hangout that might be able to comment on what might need to be done to bring publishers on board with preprint, open preprint peer review. Okay. I see that as, I guess, one of the biggest hurdles, and it's the chicken and egg problem. In order to excite senior PIs, you need to kind of show them that the big journals they're interested in publishing in are going to.
I would also like add that we don't need to necessarily get all senior PIs on board. It's basically we need to make people such as Prachi become senior quicker, and that's basically how changes and revolution happened in the past across many different fields. There are always naysayers. And there are people that are on board with this new thing. And I see some senior researchers that are on board with this. And I see some that are, the typical, oh, it's new and, it's not peer reviewed, so it might be wrong. And what if the media picks it up and so on and so forth. So I'm just saying that this is not necessarily crucial to do this because time goes only one way. So eventually we're going to see more people like Prachi and others in more senior positions.
Yeah, I had one brief comment that I wanted to make, if I may.
Yes, please.
Yes, it's to do with basically a screening of the preprints. I know that the likes of the bioRxiv do a very quick screen just to make sure it's not complete batches. But there were two, and that's a positive thing. There were two examples that came up over the weekends where somebody posted two preprints to bioRxiv, and there were simply photographs. So I don't know what the
So great, Graham. We're not really able to make sense of you at the moment.
That's my microphone problem.
Do you want to type your question? I can read it out.
Yeah, we'll move on.
Okay. Someone online asked about kind of commenting at conferences as well. Not sure. So the question is how to open conference, bring preprints approaches for conferences. I mean, that's something we've been trying to address by having a conference-focused preprint page so that all of the preprints for a particular conference will be listed on this page and people can comment and provide feedback there. The idea is that people can go and visit the posters and actually ask the authors questions as part of the feedback process and then share that online as well.
Yeah, I've been working with you Academic Karma, trying to at least, my employer BDI do a yearly, quite traditional style conference, but yeah, I've been experimenting with one track, trying to get all submitters to submit their conference entries in bioRxiv and then do peer review with Academic Karma. So that's been a small scale experiment, still in progress. So we'll see how it goes. But even if you can't get whole conferences to flip, then session organizers and stuff, there are options that they can experiment with.
Okay.
I see Graham's question now. So he's talking about two examples in Psychive where pictures were posted without screening. The OSF preprint servers are not screening these things. Archive, the original preprint server, costs a small fee to submit. I think a very small one. But they do have a screening process. But yeah, the OSF ones don't. So Is that a question or a comment, Graham?
So maybe I can jump in here for this discussion. Is it really a problem that someone can post something that is not scientific or doesn't meet most scientist criteria of a paper on a preprint server? Is that really an issue? Because I mean, it will be basically vetted out by the community. Like this preprint will never get any positive reviews, if it will get any reviews at all. And there is cost in adding screening. Like someone needs to do screening, and you have to hire people to do screening manually, or have to build systems to do it. And I'm talking about these sort of situations where someone posts something that it doesn't look like a paper. Obviously, there are some edge cases where things are basically illegal if you publish some content. But I've heard this argument about screening and making sure this is academic a few times, but I struggle to understand why is this a problem.
It relates to another question, I should say, on the YouTube channel, which is that a lot of preprint servers don't allow review papers and commentary papers. And I've heard that that's because they would just be overwhelmed by people writing commentaries and reviews, and that the actual scientific papers would be a small proportion of their submissions. But yes, so I think you just need kind of automatic methods for screening, in some sense, just doing basic, well, filtering, not really necessarily screening, but indicating to readers that this may not be a proper paper.
So I'm a bioRxiv affiliate, so I do some screening for bioRxiv. So basically this is not paid, it's all on a voluntary basis. So they just try to expand the number of scientists who can occasionally log in and take a look at the queue of papers that have been submitted and sort of give the go-ahead or send it back, kick it back to the in-house staff. And, the idea is to, just use the best judgment of scientists to decide whether or not what has been submitted is science. And also there is that bar of because they're trying to keep out sort of the review article or the undergraduate essay, that they want there to be some sort of new analysis of some sort, even if it is some type of perspective piece. So just even if it's just newest analysis of existing data or whatever it may be. But so, yes, automation would be great, but I think, their reasoning so far is sort of to try to use the people who are reading the science to decide whether or not it is science. And so, of course, there have been criticisms over whether or not that's being done properly, and things slip through and things get kicked back, which people think shouldn't be kicked back, and things like that. So I think it's sort of an evolving discussion, but and they have no problem sort of scaling this up to as the number of preprint submissions scale up, so that it can sort of still be a rapid turnaround for getting things posted. I don't have any answers here, but just that it seems like this is a reasonable way to go about doing it, to have scientists judge whether or not it's science.
Great.
So what is the cost of someone posting their undergraduate essay on a preprint server? What is the downside of that we have to invest so much into preventing?
Yeah, I wish I could answer that. So I'm actually sort of on this side too. I actually think review articles and things like that are good, and even having that undergraduate essay, it's actually the same sort of argument that people have against preprints in general. That how do you know that you're not going to flood the market with what people consider either low quality work or anything. And I tend to be on your side in that the community will vet this, and that the sort of, the good work will rise to the top. And I guess the argument that I hear against it when I tell people this is that they're concerned that that it's just it's a practical issue of not being able to go through everything. So, you know, people are still sort of using, you know, authorship and big name labs and things like that as a quality proxy, even if you don't have the journal as a quality proxy. And so you just have people who are unable to read everything somehow trying to find what it is that they'd like to read, and so you have sort of a lot of noise in the signal, I guess. That's at least what I get told when I sort of make that same argument, that it's just difficult to, or for example, in cases where you're looking outside of your very, you know, specific area of expertise, is that if you're sort of, you know, when you have a commissioned review or something like that, that's somehow there are some credentials upon which that is based, or that someone is an expert in the field to write that essay or that perspective. Whereas if you're outside of the field, it's sort of hard for you to judge, you know, whether or not, you know, this is a good way to sort of get oriented with the field. So playing devil's advocate based on what I hear from people, but I tend to agree with you that you know, as a scientist in my own field, I feel like I can evaluate the work and decide for myself what I want to read, and also get notified about what you know, what might be relevant to my interests.
I feel there is actually a opposite risk as well, because from what I've heard, the criticism of bioRxiv or other archive systems and preprints is that, well, this work has not been vetted yet. Like, people have not peer reviewed it, and now we put it out there, and someone will cite it, and people will take it as you know, peer-reviewed truth, and this is wrong. We have to prevent that, because people will take this work too seriously too soon. And now we're starting this discussion of, well, we need to treat archives and preprint servers as proxy of quality. We're getting into, well, isn't it a journal now? Because we only accept certain level of quality or not. So I think it should be as messy as legally allowed, and then we should build systems on top of that help us sieve through it and recommend us things that are good. Google is doing a reasonably good job at that, and there are other companies in this space, and there will be more. It's a huge problem, and having an army of people going through submissions and figuring out if that's an undergraduate essay or not is not a scalable solution here.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. So I think that the problem with you know, any amount of restrictions, and I sort of have this problem with, you know, I think there are partly funders and also scientists who are reluctant want to have this sort of increase in standards. And I also agree with you that I fear that that's a slippery slope of basically generating a whole nother journal system, which we definitely don't need. So, you know, I agree with you in the messiness, and allowing just what authors think ought to be on there is what should be on there. You know, what authors decide is appropriate is what is appropriate. Yeah.
I wish we had some preprint haters in the discussion, because we sort of like talking among each other.
Fortunately, they didn't turn up tonight. So, yeah.
Lachlan, maybe you. I've heard you hate preprints. I think you're muted.
Thank you. No, obviously I'm a big fan, but I haven't even actually talked about some of the great experiences we've had as preprint authors as well, just getting stuff out there and getting comments back. And even on one occasion, an editor wrote to us and asked if we would submit to their journal. And actually, we'd already just submitted to another journal that was transferred to Scientific Reports. And in fact, we quickly pulled it out of there and submitted it to the journal from which they had sort of contacted us, because we thought having someone really enthusiastic about a paper was probably going to help us get things reviewed more quickly. So Graham's saying he posted his first preprint 10 years ago, so he's not qualifying as a preprint hater either.
Any more questions on the list we want to go through before we finish?
I feel we've kind of covered most of them through the talk or subsequently. So we might wrap it up. Okay, well, thanks everyone for joining. That was really good discussion. And keep fighting the good fight. Hopefully preprints and peer review will become a reality in a few years. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to meet you all.
Happy peer review week, everybody, and good night from Hong Kong.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.